Settle into the dark that belongs to you, where the curtains breathe a little with the night and the room remembers your shape. A single candle is enough. Its small flame writes gold along the rim of a glass and makes a circle that feels like shelter. In that circle, a story arrives quietly, as if it has walked a long way to reach your bed and learned to whisper on the road. This is a gentle telling of a fierce life, a soft map drawn around sharp edges, the beginning of the tale of a boy who gathered names like coats and a man who tried to outrun ending. Whatever clamor the world may bring, it is far away from you now. Here there is only the warm hush of breath, the soft weight of blankets, and a story moving at the speed of rest. Before there was a castle and crowds and the iron taste of ambition, there was a narrow room with windows that kept secrets and cupboards that closed with tired sounds. A ledger on a desk waited for new ink. When Tom Riddle was entered there, he became a row on a page and a small bundle in a bed. No banners, no toasts, only the vocabulary of survival that children learn without ceremony. He grew like a candle kept out of drafts, thin, bright, determined to hold its own flame. He learned to fold his own clothes, to count his own coins, to tuck his astonishments away where no one could scold them. He learned to watch people the way some watch weather, to know when a storm would decide to visit and how long it planned to stay. Children become cartographers of their small kingdoms. Tom learned which floorboards betrayed him and which doors forgave his touch. He learned that silence moves faster than noise, and that attention can be steered if you know how to hold your face. He shared little of the few treasures he permitted himself: a button that felt lucky, a postcard of a far city, a smooth stone that held the temperature of his hand. To other children he could be kind, but rarely. Kindness felt like lending a coat you were not sure you would ever get back. When odd things happened around him, things that made bullies doubt themselves and kept cupboards from swallowing what was not theirs, he decided the line between accident and intention was a fence he could move whenever necessary. He became careful with his smiles and even more careful with his silences. One afternoon, a visitor arrived with eyes that seemed glad to meet light. He sat as if chairs were old friends and spoke as if words knew their manners. He named Tom's strangeness without fear, as if fear were merely a badly behaved guest that could be escorted out. "There is a school," he said, "where ordinary doors have learned to be brave, and a lake that holds the moon, and a hat that listens and sings." The map of Tom's future unfolded like a road where lamplight already waited. It was a kindness that did not flinch. It was an invitation that did not pity. Tom placed it carefully in his pocket with the rest of his treasures and decided that invitations, like coins, are best used at the right moment. He came to the station with a case that had more purpose than possessions. Smoke braided the air. Voices gathered into a warm weather that wrapped around him and asked nothing but his presence. The train was a promise disguised as machinery, and it kept its promise by carrying him into a country made of stone and listening. The castle rose as if it had grown from the bones of the hill. Its windows regarded him like patient eyes. Inside there were lines and laughter, and a sense that the very staircases enjoyed the conversation. He learned the etiquette of candles and corridors, of portraits that greeted you by name, of tables that sighed a little when the feast arrived. He learned the place where his name would be set down in a new ledger, not on paper this time, but in memory. There is a way some people are with learning. They drink from the cup, and then they make the cup, and then they offer the cup with a smile that says they never drank at all. Tom had that way. Rules slid beneath his hands like cards, quick and clean. Praise arrived, and he treated it like a tool rather than a feast. He learned to enter a room as if he had always been there. He listened for the hum the world makes when it is about to offer up a secret. Libraries liked him for his patience. Locks respected him for his concentration. Teachers admired the exactness with which he accepted instruction and the efficiency with which he surpassed it. He learned to move through applause without tripping and through suspicion without leaving footprints. Names tilted the balance of his days. The one written at birth tasted of absence. The one he began to design tasted of invention. A name can be a house you build for yourself, and he was an architect with sharp pencils. He drew letters that asked the world to step back. He chose sounds that made command look like elegance. He rearranged the furniture of his identity until visitors forgot what the room used to be. The new name was colder, yes, but it did not tremble. It wore the posture he practiced in mirror glass, and it learned to stand where he placed it, on banners of his imagination, on the edge of other people's tongues, in the silence that follows a question nobody dares to ask. In classrooms he smiled. In corridors his eyes stayed busy. In mirrors he rehearsed not what he felt, but what he wanted others to feel. He studied kindness as a scholar studies a specimen. Label, pin, observe, conclude. Kindness, he decided, was a temporary weather front that ruined long plans. Loyalty, though, could be engineered. Give people shape. Give them a story. Promise to spare them the untidy business of choice if they choose now. He did not scream when he could suggest. He did not threaten when he could imply. Influence became the quiet instrument whose notes he preferred, a music that reached the balcony and the back row without ever sounding like a drum. Yet the castle offered an older curriculum no timetable could contain. The grain of tables softened by generations of elbows, the way a staircase pauses as if it, too, needs to breathe. The way someone passes you bread, simply because the basket has reached your corner. Old magic dressed itself as everyday patience. He filed it under curiosities, unproven and unimportant. Love, he thought, was a superstition used to excuse weakness. Promise-keeping was a net designed to slow strong swimmers. He did not notice the nets holding the building together, the promises embedded in stone, promises to shelter, to listen, to remember. He was clever enough to learn every spell the school offered, and not quite wise enough to recognize the ones it never named. Objects tempted him because they did not argue. A ring knew what it was. A locket kept its story close. A diary could be persuaded to hold more than ink. He sought the quiet nobility of relics, their refusal to forget, their confidence that history was a garment one could wear and be transformed. If a thing had once belonged to a person whose name opened doors, he wanted the door, the name, and the room beyond it. He wanted history the way a soldier wants a map, not to understand the land, but to take it. In the presence of objects, he felt the relief of not having to negotiate a silver certainty that did not require anyone else's consent. Sleep comes easier when fear is named and placed where it belongs, so let us place it now. Fear is weather. Sometimes it is a fast rain on warm stone. Sometimes it is fog with patient hands. Sometimes it is the kind of wind that makes doors remember old hinges. It is never a permanent address. He learned to make others fear him because fear resembles respect if you blur your eyes. He learned to fear only one thing in return, and he did not speak it aloud. He feared ending. He feared being finished like a book closed and set back on a shelf by a hand that does not hesitate. He gathered knowledge and titles and obedience against that fear the way people tuck extra blankets at the foot of a bed. But winter remains winter even if the closet groans with wool. After school, the wide world offered its theater, and he dressed for the role he had written. He could be courteous with such concentration that courtesy itself felt indebted to him. He could be listening while you confessed and simultaneously measuring the room for the portrait he would later hang. People who had never felt important found that his gaze made them crisp and legible. They stood straighter inside it. A circle gathered, not all at once, but like a tide that kept discovering hidden inlets. Masks arrived, and with masks came the relief of anonymity. With anonymity came permission. He promised purpose to the purposeless, order to those who feared chaos, triumph to bruised pride. For a while, people slept better standing beneath the banner of his voice. There were wars, and there were whispers, but not tonight. We keep the loud things far off, like thunder at the edge of a summer field. What matters for rest is the lesson that arrived disguised as disaster. A curse flung like a spear met a doorway where love stood. The world, which listens even when it appears to be looking elsewhere, made a decision in favor of what keeps children breathing. Certainty scattered like ash from a paper that burned too quickly. He survived in the way a voice survives in a long corridor after the speaker has left. Thin, insistent, almost convincing if you stand at the right angle. Let the details soften here. Let them be a painting viewed from across a quiet hall, all motion stilled into suggestion. Years wandered. He wandered with them. The body is usually our loudest instrument. Without it, his music was a hiss and a whisper. He borrowed shapes the way travelers borrow roofs, without thanking the rafters. Forests learned his presence in a language older than names. Snakes revised their sentences to accommodate his syllables. The world did not end just because he wished to continue. It insisted on continuing in spite of him, with seasons that refused to stay where he put them. Winter left. Spring returned. Somewhere a boy wrote in a diary and the diary wrote back. Somewhere a memory remembered itself too well. Somewhere a castle carried on, counting the footsteps of students who laughed in hallways he would not visit for a while. When he rebuilt himself, he gathered the old circle as a shepherd gathers sheep with a whistle that pretends to be music. He held a wand and felt, perhaps for the first time, the reluctance of wood to do what it had not chosen. Wands have biographies. They are stubborn about authorship. He declared ownership and discovered that stories do not always salute merely because a voice is trained to command. He learned that twin cores make reluctant mirrors and that echoes do not always obey. If he had loved paradox, he might have loved that moment. He did not. He tightened his circle and wrote his orders in firmer ink. You are safe in your bed while he tries, again and again, to make safety illegal. You are safe while he redraws maps into tighter spirals. You are safe while places you love close their shutters for a while, and then, very quietly, open them again. Safety is not the denial of danger. It is the presence of care. Somewhere a trio learns to make a small tent into a home. Somewhere an old house opens its protective mouth and speaks passwords of loyalty. Somewhere a creature once underestimated becomes a guardian because someone learned to pronounce his name with respect. These are the older magics the castle taught without textbooks. Hospitality, promise-keeping, the practice of showing up even when one is frightened. Perhaps you are drifting now. Let the candle finish the watching. Let the room practice being a harbor. The rest of the tale will bring forests and corridors, a last walk that is not a last walk, and a last word that refuses to be the final line. For this prelude, it is enough to gather the tools we will need later. Compassion that does not excuse but understands. Curiosity that asks where a road might have turned. patience that recognizes how long it takes to grow a different kind of future. The story is not here to startle you awake. It is here to keep you company as you fall asleep, like a friend speaking softly from the next chair. Think again of names. A name tries to be a prophecy, but it is only a sign on a path. You can follow the sign, or you can walk into the field and find another way through the grass. He fashioned a name that claimed to be a promise. It was only a threat shaped like a crown. Crowns are heavy when you have to hold them up with both hands. He held his until his arms shook. The people holding ladders beneath him looked up and began to wonder why their necks ached. Wonder, with time, becomes courage. Courage, with care, becomes change. If you wish, imagine the forest where an argument with destiny became a conversation. Do not imagine shouting, imagine hush. A boy grown, but still a boy walked into trees that accepted him the way night accepts stars. He laid down what power could not grasp. He stood where love had already stood and did not move. The world noticed. The old magic the castle taught without ever naming flickered into bright certainty. Somewhere in the geometry of wands and wills, ownership recognized itself and gravitated toward the hand that would treat it as something other than a leash. The storm, having made its case, spent itself. Morning always follows something. It followed him too. In the morning there were lists in repair, laughter too bright because relief makes color louder, tears like small rain on tile, bread shared at tables that had waited all night to be useful again. The castle stretched its arches like a cat waked from a long nap. Portraits compared notes. Students who had practiced being brave for so long they had become the kind of people who no longer needed to practice curled in chairs and startled awake only when joy surprised them. Owls resumed ordinary routes as if nothing profound had happened, which is the way of owls and sometimes the way of healing. All of that waits ahead in the deeper chapters. Tonight is only the soft threshold. Tonight we treat the fearsome name as a stone warmed by the sun and then left to cool. We let it lose its sharpness while we watch. We let it become a reminder rather than a warning. The reminder is not complicated. It says, try not to make yourself a monument to your own hunger. It says, allow endings to end so that beginnings can keep their appointments. It says, when the candle burns low, sleep. The room is even quieter now. The candle makes a small lake in its dish, and you can hear the tiny sound it makes as it thinks about going out. Your breath is the kind of river that knows where it is going without asking you to steer. Let it take you. If thoughts arrive in cloaks and posture like important visitors, give them a seat by the door and a cup of imaginary tea and then forget about them. They will leave when they realize the house is not taking requests. You have given enough to the day. You may be kept now by night. What, finally, do we do with a life like his as we prepare to sleep? We hold it far enough away to see its shape and close enough to feel the lesson in our hands. We remember that a child can become a caution, and a caution can become a story, and a story can become a lullaby. We remember that names can be rearranged, but hearts require tending. We remember that fear is weather, not law. We remember that love, old, unshowy, and stubborn, can be the hinge that turns a locked door into a doorway. We remember that power without belonging becomes a room that echoes only with its own voice, and that belonging without power grows strong when it keeps its promises. The boy who collected objects because objects would not argue learned to speak to crowds because crowds kept agreeing. The man who gathered circles learned that circles can be cages. He wanted a morning that never aged into afternoon. He demanded a noon that refused to become evening. The world kept time anyway. That is not cruelty. That is mercy. The sun does not ask us to hold it up. It asks us to live beneath it and make peace with shadows. If you need a last picture to carry into sleep, imagine the castle from a distance. Imagine it as a soft geometry of shadow and moonlight, windows like slow blinks, towers like old trees. One window, very small from where you are, shows a desk with an open notebook. On the page, a hand has written a name, and then another, as if the exercise will settle something. The ink is dry. The room is empty. Night moves through the stone like a tide turning, calm and inevitable. The page turns itself in a small wind, and the new page is blank. The building allows itself a sigh, content to wait for morning. Set aside the rest. There is nothing now but soft air and the knowledge that stories can be tools for sleep if we ask them kindly. Someone once used a story to make himself a crown. Tonight we use a story to make a pillow. Lay your head down. The pillow holds. The blanket understands. The candle keeps its watch. Outside, the world is learning to be quiet with you. Inside, your breathing arranges the darkness into rooms that feel like home. If a name comes knocking, let it pass by on padded feet, polite as a cat. If a worry tries to lecture, let the candle interrupt by doing exactly what it does. It glows and says nothing. You do not have to remember all of this. Half-heard stories are the best kind for sleeping. Let the parts you need stay. Let the rest wander off like guests who know how to leave without making you rise. Somewhere a portrait lowers its voice. Somewhere an owl decides there is nothing urgent. Somewhere a staircase pauses one step longer out of habit and kindness. Your room, which has practiced this many nights, knows what to do. It darkens by degrees, patient as the sea settling after a wave. And so the boy becomes a man, and the man becomes a caution, and the caution becomes a story, and the story, tonight, becomes a lullaby. Let it hum at the edge of your hearing while you do the ancient work of sleep. The name he chose will wait outside like weather. The name he was given will fold itself back into a ledger that no longer matters. What matters is smaller. The warmth of your blanket, the patience of the dark, the small brave circle of light that keeps watch. Breathe in as if the candle were teaching you how. Breathe out as if the night were answering. The storm, which is not here, has nothing to say. The candle, which is here, has said enough. Close your eyes. You are safe. Sleep. Settle back and let the candle take the first watch, its small flame steady as a heartbeat. Tonight the story drifts backward, beyond the boy and the name he chose, back to stones older than his footsteps and thistles that gripped the wind long before he ever breathed. Ancestry is a kind of weather that lingers. You can feel it on your skin, though you didn't call for rain. We will walk softly through two households that faced each other across fields and centuries, without ever agreeing on what mattered. A crumbling shack that believed pride could replace love, and a polished manor that believed comfort could replace tenderness. Between them, a girl sought warmth, a boy on horseback passed like summer, and the future listened from the hedgerows. The gaunt house stood off the lane as if embarrassed to be seen, a little crooked, a little mean. Its garden was more argument than plot, thistles tall as spears, nettles with opinions, stones that remembered when they belonged to a wall and held the grudge. Inside, objects clung to the idea that importance can be inherited like a coat, even after moths have learned the pattern by heart. There was a ring that believed its gold was a memory palace, and a locket that slept on a chain like a quiet threat. The family kept these like prayers, convinced that owning relics was the same as being blessed. Marvolo Gaunt was the sort of man who looked at the world as if it were a ledger gone wrong, full of entries that had not sought his permission. His words had the texture of old rope, rough and stained by weather. He wore his lineage the way a knight wears a dented breastplate. More noise than protection, more story than substance. To him, compassion was a soft apple going bad on the windowsill, and gentleness a cracked plate to be thrown out. If you asked him to name love, he would point to a bloodline and call it the same thing, which tells you almost everything. Morphin, his son, moved like a shadow, startled by its own shape, eyes pricked by splinters of the world only he could see. If cruelty was offered, he took it up like a tool. If silence fell, he rattled it until it felt like company. The house taught him that power meant never apologizing, that pain meant never admitting tenderness, that the world was a field sown with insults waiting to grow. He learned the dialect of danger at a young age and spoke it fluently, even when nobody else understood the sentence. The thistles leaned toward him as if they, too, recognized a familiar sting. Merope, the daughter, lived between those two winds, the father's storm and the brother's prickling weather. She learned how to be small without becoming nothing, how to make herself useful without asking for a seat, how to shelter a candle behind her hands, though the room laughed at the effort. Her magic was shy for a while, like a bird who has learned that windows sometimes pretend to be sky. Every kindness she dared toward herself had to sneak past the guard dogs of contempt. She collected her hopes in small, secret jars and labeled them with patient handwriting no one else ever read. The village road brought people past, and among them rode a young man who did not know how loudly his ease spoke on his behalf. The horse did the talking for him, hooves writing neat punctuation across the lane. His name was kept neatly at home on monograms and napkins, but here he was simply a shape of brightness passing the thistle dark. Tom Riddle of the manor did not look toward the shack often. When he did, the glance was the kind that sails above roofs and refuses to see. Comfort, when it grows without curiosity, becomes a mirror that mistakes itself for a window. There are houses that teach reverence for the past as a living conversation, and there are houses that teach reverence for the past as a lock. The Gaunt place belonged to the second kind. Marvolo would hold up the ring between two fingers, the way a magistrate might display a seal, and the room would be expected to applaud. He would tap the locket against the table and call it history, as if metal could do the speaking for him. When tenderness approached Merope, it wore the costume of disobedience, for to speak kindly to her was to disagree with the logic of the house. She learned to love quietly and then to love invisibly. The manor at Little Hangleton sang in a different key. Rooms were sunlit opinions about propriety. Carpets softened footsteps into polite consent. At the table, cutlery seemed to know its role by instinct. Tom Riddle's parents occupied the air the way portraits do, composed, practiced, certain that frames improve what they contain. The garden trembled with roses that refused to tell secrets. The fountain did its best to forget what water is like out in the world. If the Gaunt shack was a sermon about blood, the Riddle manor was a sermon about polish, and both sermons forgot to bless the heart. When Merope watched the lane and saw the rider pass, it felt as if someone had opened a window in a room that had never considered such a thing necessary. The air moved differently. The light tried new angles. She did not believe in fairy stories, because fairy stories had not believed in her, but she believed in warmth and the way a hand might fit inside another hand without needing permission from the ghosts. In another life, in another household, she might have met him in a market where apples were honest and conversation flowed like water, and perhaps they would have learned each other in the language of laughter. In this life, She counted hoofbeats and let hope practice standing. The old magic that answers to no counsel sometimes arrives as a cup offered to a shivering soul. Merope found a way to pour a little summer into an ordinary day. You could call it a spell, you could call it borrowed light, you could call it the kind of desperate kindness a starving heart may feed itself when all other food is forbidden. She wanted to be seen without the noise of lineage shouting over her shoulder, without the house arranging the stage, without contempt making a mask of her face. She wanted a chance to learn love out in the open, the way mornings learn to become noon by practicing brightness. They went away from the village like two notes threading themselves into a melody that almost found harmony. Towns behind them said things that towns say when presented with a mystery, some kind, some cruel, many certain. Rooms ahead of them made space like rooms do for the brave and the reckless, clearing a table, laying towels across a chair, opening a window to the evening air. For a time, happiness tried on ordinary clothes. Merope warmed to the idea that a day could continue into the next without requiring apology. The young man discovered, perhaps, that elegance alone is a thin blanket. They learned each other's gestures, the way people do when the world narrows to a room and an attentive sky. Some winters are gentle, and some winters arrive like a question that has waited too long to be asked. When Merope stopped borrowing light, she did not do it from cunning but from hope. If love is love, it should be able to stand on its own feet, she thought. If a heart is truly seen, it won't need lanterns carried at noon. She wanted the kind of belonging that doesn't keep receipts. The day she set the cup down, the room leaned forward to listen. There was the sound of a coat being taken up, the sound of a door that had practiced being closed, the sound of footsteps convinced they were doing only what steps must do. The world is not always a villain when it disappoints us. Sometimes it is only blunt. Tom returned to the great house with its practiced manners, and the walls accepted him like a word finding its sentence again. People looked relieved to be able to return him to the categories they preferred. Merope faced a winter of a different sort. City streets that did not know her name, shop windows that admired her only as a reflection, air that allowed itself to be breathed, but did not offer conversation. She wrapped her hands around her belly and spoke to the future, as mothers do when there is nobody else to listen, telling it stories about mornings that would be kinder than this one. There are kindnesses that do not know they are heroic because they are busy being practical. A door opens, a stranger shares bread, a clerk lowers a price because the day has been long and decency is its own reward. Merope found these small lights flickering in places that were not trying to be miracles. She traded the locket for coin because the future eats, and because a child is a promise that deserves to be kept with more than words. Somewhere, in a shop where objects queue for their next chapter, the locket laid down its pride and pretended to be just a thing again. Pride hates to pretend. It was sold, and the story moved on. The night of birth was a lesson in the kind of courage that does not shout. The room was too bright and then too dim. The hours were too many and then forgot to be counted. When the child arrived, winter shivered and adjusted its stance. Merope looked at the face that had rearranged her world and gave him the name of the man who had left and the middle name of a father who had never learned gentleness. It was an act of braver truth than it appears, to say this is where you come from, and also, may your own choices improve the inheritance. She kissed the soft forehead with the authority of someone who has paid dearly for tenderness and now spends it freely. Some stories insist on the taste of sorrow and forget the flavor of love that came before. We will not do that here. The love was real, even if it was brief, even if it was quiet. It pressed a blessing to the child's brow that would go on meaning more than anyone understood. The blessing did not erase ache. It offered a lantern to walk with through fog. Merope's breath grew thin and then thinner. Her body, which had fought so hard to make a place for life, set down its tools with a long exhale of relief and regret. The candle on the table did not dim. It only learned to stand the watch alone for a while. The orphanage ledger opened its mouth like a practical bird and swallowed the new name as it swallowed many. Paper can be a cradle of sorts, and ink, a lullaby written in another alphabet. The caretakers knew the business of keeping children alive. Blankets, bowls, the stern kindness of routine. Windows let in a light that did not ask questions. Outside, city horses kept time over cobbles, and the future practiced walking past the front steps as if it had errands in that direction. The ring and the locket slept in different rooms now, their stories continuing without the child who had arrived among them like a hinge. While the baby learned the weight of his own hands, the village he would someday visit continued its ordinary theater. At the manor, conversations resumed at precisely the point they had paused, as if someone had pressed the world's bookmark and then returned to the chair. At the shack, thistles wintered, and then sprung back with a stubbornness that would have made Marvolo proud, had he been the kind to compliment a plant for having his qualities. Morphin became more himself, which is to say, less available to other people's reasons. Objects in both houses grew older without seeming to age, the way familiar furniture does, gathering the smudges of time and turning them into dignity. Every lineage contains both wounding and wonder, but the gaunt story had specialized in handing down ache like an heirloom. The ring carried a legend inside it like a moth trapped in amber. The locket, a history that thought itself a throne. A wiser house might have taught the children that relics are letters from the past, not laws. A kinder house might have taken pride out into the yard for a walk until it learned to breathe without puffing itself up. The Gaunts kept their windows shut even in summer, and the air grew certain of itself, which air should never do. Certainty, trapped, becomes a stale perfume that poisons afternoons. Across the fields, the Riddles curated their comfort with a zeal that could have been mistaken for happiness. If love had come to the table wearing ordinary clothes, perhaps they would have passed the salt and called it neighbor. But love tends to knock at the back door as often as the front, and the back door is the one that reveals whether a house knows how to welcome the unannounced. When Tom left and returned, the house absorbed both facts without curiosity. It taught him that narratives can be edited until they behave. People who grow up inside edited stories sometimes learn to doubt the unpolished kind. Between these houses moved a figure the world later named Destiny, but destiny, seen up close, is often only a sequence of small choices that refuse to admit their size. A girl not cherished tries to make a lantern of a potion. A boy not challenged learns to mistake ease for truth. A ring listens for a finger that will not understand it. A locket waits for a throat that will never soften. The lane collects hoofbeats and sighs. The hedges keep counsel. The sky practices being impartial. If there is judgment to be made, it comes later, in quieter rooms, when someone asks what else might have been possible and listens for answers without interrupting. Let the candle guide us gently back to Merope, because her thread is easy to lose in the tapestry and deserves not to be. Think of her resting her cheek against a window pane cooled by evening and drawing small pictures on the glass with her breath. Think of her hiding coins in a shoe, because safety sometimes needs a map. Think of her saying the name she loved the way a person says the name of a city they have once visited only in a dream. Think of her learning that survival and dignity are not synonyms but can be coaxed into friendship. If love is a language, She spoke bravely with an accent nobody bothered to teach her. When the locket left her neck and later found its way to a shop full of ambitious dust, it did not stop being a story. Stories never retire. They find new readers. A clever clerk admired it. A different hand, in a different year, would wear it for fashion without knowing how near its weight pressed to legends. Somewhere else, the ring bided its time like a word that intends to change the conversation when spoken. Objects are patient in a way people are not. They know that hands come and go, but desire, for good or ill, tends to renew itself like weather over the ocean. In the orphanage, a woman who had never heard of ancient rings or proud houses sang to a child whose eyes took the room apart and rearranged it into something more interesting. Her song was not very good. It did not need to be. She patted a back with practical tenderness and learned the baby's moods as if they were hours on a clock. He slept in a cot near a window that believed in morning. The world outside his breaths continued. Factory whistles, milk carts, the fog's soft speech. The past did not visit to claim him that day. The past stayed where it was, grooming its arguments and counting, with pitiless patience, the beats of separate hearts. Ancestry wants to be destiny the way winter wants to be forever. Winter is a season, not a sentence. The gaunt line handed down a kind of brittle pride that splintered in contact with kindness. The Riddle line handed down a sort of polish that resisted deep reflection. Between them, a new life lay on a blanket, practicing the noble art of breathing. He was not yet a story other people told to frighten or to rally. He was a small warmth in a large room, a promise contained in the ordinary miracle of sleep. Had a different hand lifted him, had a different voice named him, had a different house opened a different door, perhaps the road would have bent a measurable degree elsewhere. The village, with its 2 sermons, did not ask such questions, because villages are busy with bread and roofs and rain. The shack counted its relics and sneered at the sky. The manor counted its invitations and pretended not to hear the wind. The lane kept extending itself from gate to gate, like a patient arm. In the hedgerows, sparrows rehearsed their part of the morning. A fox considered the problem of chickens. The stars did what stars do, which is not to watch us, exactly, but to insist on their own bright business in a way that can feel like blessing when we look up. In time, because everything is in time, the ring would gleam again for eyes that mistook reflection for revelation. In time, the locket would lie cool against a throat that did not understand what hunger lay sleeping in its metal. In time, a boy would become a student, and a student would become a collector of arguments and objects. But that is for later chapters to soften and shape. Tonight we remain here, where the roots are, where thistles guard a fence that protects nothing, where roses preen for guests who never test the soil, where a young woman makes of her courage a room and invites hope to enter, even if only for a short visit. If you are awake enough to listen for quiet advice, let the 2 houses offer theirs. From the shack, pride without tenderness is an empty drum. It makes noise, but never music. From the manor, comfort without curiosity is a mirror that refuses to tell the truth. From the lane, there is always a road between extremes, though neither house likes to admit it. From the hedges, shelter should include gaps for small creatures to pass. From the sky, weather changes, and so do we. From the candle, burning is the price of giving light, but given gently, light warms more than it wounds. Merope's thread thins here, but we will not let it break. Imagine her, for a last moment, standing at a window in a city room, palm pressed to glass, watching ordinary people carry their errands like lanterns. She smiles at the thought that the world contains so many errands, it must be going somewhere kind. She turns back to the cot and touches a cheek with the authority of love. She speaks a name without shame. She lays down. She leaves a silence that the room tries, valiantly, to fill with warmth. The candle on the table wavers and then steadies, because that is what candles do when asked for more than they thought they had. At the manor, a conversation about weather avoids all mention of storms. At the shack, a lecture about honor cannot find a single example that does not bruise. Somewhere in between, a midwife scrubs her hands and thinks of soup. A neighbor straightens a picture. A postman, indifferent to legend, sorts letters by street. The world is not designed to carry only one story at a time. It carries thousands, each with its own small sun. If we attend only to the loudest, we miss the quiet miracles that keep the day from tipping over. Close your eyes if you wish and see the lane as twilight takes it, hedges softening into a suggestion, the hill holding its breath, the two houses lit from within by their different kinds of certainty. The horse paths are dark ribbons now. The nettles fold themselves into night like hands at rest. Somewhere a clock lets the hour out into the room with dignity. Somewhere a kettle declines to boil until spoken to properly. The past settles in its chair, convinced of its authority, unaware of the child whose future will ask it more questions than it knows how to answer. And yet, even here, gentleness finds its way. It is in the way a draft chooses a sleeping child and curls itself into comfort rather than complaint. It is in the way the city keeps a corner of itself quiet for people with heavy thoughts. It is in the way the earth, unconsulted, continues to turn, bringing morning closer whether we approve or not. Gentle does not mean weak. It means patient. It means knowing that thistles have their hour, and so do roses, and that neither can claim the year. It means lighting a candle regardless of what the great houses decide is fashionable. If you listen carefully, you can hear the ring speaking in a language older than grammar, and the locket answering, and the wind writing footnotes in the hedges that say, "Remember the girl, remember the choice, remember the winter that asked a difficult question, and the spring that came anyway." The boy sleeps, and the page that will carry his first strange deed is still blank. The shack dreams of triumph. The manor dreams of permanence. Both forget that dreamers do not govern dawn. Dawn arrives on its own terms, spilling mild gold over roofs and weeds without checking pedigrees. So we leave the houses where they are, entrusted to their stubbornness, and follow the thread that leads us gently back to your room. Your candle has burned a little lower, but it still keeps the circle. You have traveled far among stones and thistles without moving at all. The story has laid out its foundations, a ruin that mistook pride for shelter, a manor that mistook polish for love, a young woman who dared to believe that warmth could be made, a young man who never learned to ask which comforts cost too much. Two objects that kept old oaths without understanding their price. A child whose breath harmonized with winter and promised spring. Breathe once, as if drawing the lane into your chest, hedges and all. Breathe out, as if returning the wind, improved by kindness. If the thistles of the gaunt place pricked you, let sleep draw the sting. If the roses of the manor sickened you with sweetness, let sleep rinse your tongue. Put the ring and the locket back onto the table of the past and step away softly. Whisper thanks to Merope for her courage and let her rest. Whisper nothing at all to the houses. They would not hear. Whisper to the child, if you like, a blessing, simple as warm milk. May you find the doors that open. May you learn which windows are sky and which are glass. May you someday choose the lane that leads toward gentleness. Night gathers the fields into its shawl and fastens the pin with a star. The wind lowers its voice to the pitch of sleep. Crickets keep the border between here and there with patient strokes of their small fiddles. You are far from the houses now, though the story remains close. Lay the next piece of it by your pillow as you would a letter you intend to finish in the morning. The two lines meet but do not yet cross. The ring keeps its circle. The locket holds its shape. The boy breathes. Your candle approves. You are safe. Rest. The candle waits, as it always does, flame low but patient, as though it knows you are ready for the story to continue. We have walked together through thistles and manners, through the hush of a girl's hope and the silence that followed. Tonight, the tale turns to the boy who grew in the orphanage halls, the child who became a student at a castle that had been waiting centuries for his arrival. This is not told as thunder, but as a drifting cloud, slow and steady, so you may fall asleep while it carries you. Tom grew among corridors that echoed with many small footsteps, where children's voices rose and fell like waves, where toys were few and discipline was plenty. He learned early that to share was to risk loss, and so he guarded his treasures closely. A button, a stone, a folded slip of paper. These were kingdoms when you had no other. The caretakers were not unkind, but their attention was spread thin, and Tom noticed. He noticed everything. He noticed when someone lied. He noticed when someone looked away too quickly. He noticed that odd things happened when his temper stirred, and that people stepped back from him without understanding why. Loneliness is a seed that grows in strange shapes. For Tom, it grew into an eagerness to command. He discovered that he could make other children afraid, and fear was a coin that bought him a little power. When he wanted something, it found its way into his hand. When he wanted silence, the room seemed to obey. He had no words yet for what was inside him, only the certainty that he was not ordinary, and that ordinariness was something to flee. He was already rehearsing the future without knowing the stage's name. The day a visitor arrived, the air in the orphanage shifted. Albus Dumbledore, not yet headmaster but already a man of careful observation, came with eyes that weighed kindness and suspicion in equal measure. He spoke to Tom with a tone that did not flatter and did not belittle, but balanced. He named the boy's strangeness and gave it context. Magic, a word that unlatched 100 hidden doors. Tom tested the visitor, showing fragments of the control he had discovered, watching for recoil. But Dumbledore did not flinch. He set a small wardrobe aflame with a flick of his wand, then restored it whole again, to prove that Tom's strangeness was not unique but shared. The boy's world tilted, not into comfort, but into certainty. He was not alone. He was powerful, and there was a place where that power belonged. The castle greeted him as it greets all children, with wonder carved into stone, staircases that enjoy surprises, portraits eager to gossip. For Tom, Hogwarts was not simply a school, it was a kingdom waiting for its sovereign. The sorting hat, placed upon his dark hair, spoke of cunning and ambition. It whispered of Slytherin, the house where those qualities were not only allowed but celebrated. Tom agreed. The hat had hardly finished its sentence before he embraced the choice. To him, the serpent was not a warning but a herald. He would rise among those who valued resourcefulness and strength. In lessons he excelled. Charms obeyed his wand as if eager. Potions shimmered obediently under his hand. Professors praised his intelligence, and he accepted their words with grace but no humility. Other students admired him, drawn in by the gravity of his confidence, yet behind his polite smile, Tom was always measuring calculating, storing away names and weaknesses. Friendships, to him, were rehearsals for loyalty, kindness, a tool to be unsheathed when useful. He built a circle of admirers, and though they believed themselves his friends, he regarded them as instruments, each playing the notes he arranged. But what stirred him most was not the syllabus of spells, nor the admiration of peers. It was history. Tom scoured the library for whispers of the founders. He lingered longest on Salazar Slytherin, who spoke of purity, who valued bloodlines, who left behind not only a house, but a chamber hidden deep within the stone. The Chamber of Secrets was a tale, a myth to most. To Tom, it was a promise. He traced the hints, followed the threads, and listened closely to the whispers in his veins, for he could speak to serpents. Parseltongue slid from his mouth as naturally as breath, and the serpents answered. This gift, rare and feared, told him that he was chosen, that Slytherin's legacy was his. He sought the chamber. Stone yielded, and secrets uncurled. He found the creature that had slept, and with a command, he guided its gaze. Students fell, paralyzed by its stare. Fear filled the corridors, a mist thicker than fog. Yet Tom moved untouched, unseen, a ghost with perfect control. He was still young, still learning, yet already he was rehearsing dominion. When a girl died, her body cold, in a bathroom that became her eternal home, Tom adjusted the story to protect himself. Blame fell elsewhere. The school trembled. The chamber closed again, its secret keeper silent, but not finished. Objects called to him as much as serpents. The ring of the Gaunts, the locket once sold in desperation, the diary he fashioned himself, all became more than possessions. They became containers, vessels for fragments of his soul. For Tom had learned of a magic most feared, a splitting of self that promised endurance. Death, the shadow that frightened all, could be denied if one was willing to pay. He paid. He tore pieces from himself and hid them in things. The diary first, written with the arrogance of a boy who believed memory could be made immortal. Later, the locket, the cup, the diadem, each infused with the hunger for forever. Hogwarts gave him knowledge, but it also gave him mirrors. In the calm gaze of Dumbledore, he saw suspicion. In the loyalty of his circle, he saw tools that could break. In the chamber, he saw power, but also the risk of discovery. These mirrors reflected truths he disliked, and so he learned to polish them, to twist them, to ignore what he did not wish to see. He graduated with accolades, but also with questions. Where others left school and wandered into the lives of work and family, Tom sought only more secrets, more objects, more assurances against the silence of death. But pause here. Let the story slow, because this is still a bedtime telling. Imagine the boy walking alone in candlelit corridors, robes brushing stone, his shadow taller than himself. He is clever, yes, and ambitious, but he is also still only a boy longing to escape the fate of ordinariness. Loneliness still hums behind his every step, though he would never admit it. Power is a loud companion, but not always a warm one. And so the child who once watched horses pass by thistles, the child whose mother whispered her love with her final breath, walks deeper into the castle's heart and deeper into himself. Take a breath now. Inhale, as though you too are walking that corridor, torchlight steady against the walls. Exhale and let it go. The story will keep until the next candle is lit. For tonight, you are safe, and the boy is only a shadow in a tale, softened by distance, carried by words into rest. The candle lifts its flame again, steady as breath, steady as heartbeat. You have walked through thistle and manor, orphanage corridor and castle stair. You have seen the boy shape himself into a mask. Tonight the story continues, but not with thunder. It is a tide that rolls in slowly, a tide of choices that gathered around him as he stepped beyond the castle doors. This is the chapter of Tom Riddle leaving school and deciding to never be Tom again. It is the slow birth of a name that wanted to last longer than time itself. We will tell it softly, not to glorify, not to frighten, but to understand how a boy's hunger hardened into a man's crown. Let the telling be as quiet as nightfall, a lullaby of ambition that moved like a shadow across the years. He left Hogwarts with honors pinned neatly upon him, professors satisfied, classmates admiring. To them, Tom was a model, polite, brilliant, handsome in his way, steady-handed in every charm and potion. They did not know the ledger he kept in his mind, a secret record of every slight, every secret, every opportunity for power. They did not know that his farewell smile to the castle was not gratitude but calculation. He had learned what it could teach, and now the world outside would be his laboratory. The Ministry of Magic was the path many expected of him. Already he had been noted, marked as a rising star, someone who could shape policy, who might sit in a fine office and draft laws with elegant fingers. But Tom did not want offices. He did not want to guard the world. He wanted to own it. When the ministry extended its hand, he nodded, thanked, and let the offer rest politely upon the table, untouched. Instead, he sought employment in a shop, not any shop, but Borgin and Burke's, where objects hummed with secret history. To outsiders, it looked a humble position, a clerk, cataloging dusty curiosities. To Tom, it was an archive of whispered power. Each artifact carried stories older than law, older than councils, older even than Hogwarts, rings that remembered oaths, lockets that had survived dynasties, cups that had touched lips of founders. The shop was a temple of temptation, and Tom, its priest, he charmed customers, soft as silk. He coaxed stories from them, then coaxed their treasures from reluctant hands. They left poorer, not realizing what they had surrendered until too late. Tom's eyes burned behind his politeness. Every acquisition was not a sale, but a conquest. Among those objects he found fragments of his own bloodline, relics of Slytherin's heirs, relics of gaunt desperation. The locket that had once circled Merope's neck returned to his palm, and when it did, he felt the circle close. He wore it not as jewelry, but as proclamation. I am not orphan. I am heir. He sought more. Hepzibah Smith, wealthy collector, opened her cabinets to him, beguiled by his courtesy. She showed him Helga Hufflepuff's cup, Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem. He admired them with an actor's delight, while inside, desire struck like lightning. These were not trinkets. They were promises. If the locket bound him to Slytherin, then the cup would bind him to Hufflepuff, the diadem to Ravenclaw. Gryffindor's sword, alas, slept in Dumbledore's keeping, but 3 would suffice for now. 3 founders whispering through their heirlooms, crowning him with legitimacy. Not long after, Hepzibah died. The official tale was accident, but whispers curled like smoke. The cup and locket vanished, their new resting place never spoken. Tom resigned from the shop. His polite courtesy dissolved into distance, and soon Borgin and Burke's was another closed chapter, a stepping stone across the river of his ambition. He disappeared then, for years. Some said he traveled the world. Some said he hunted relics in dark forests, bargained with creatures who refused human names. studied spells so ancient their ink had crumbled into dust. What is certain is this: when he returned, he was changed. His face was pale, sharper than memory, his eyes carrying a glint that unsettled those who met them. The handsome young man had become something harder to describe and harder still to look at for long. He was no longer Tom. He had taken the letters of his name and rearranged them as if identity were a puzzle to be solved. Lord Voldemort, he called himself. A title, not a name. A word that felt less like heritage and more like spell. To speak it was to taste fear. To carry it was to declare himself legend. Tom Riddle, orphan, student, clerk, was dead. In his place stood a lord of shadows, crowned not by ancestry but by sheer will to endure. But a crown requires followers. He gathered them from all corners, pure-blood zealots hungry for supremacy, discontented wizards seeking purpose, frightened souls who mistook obedience for safety. He offered them masks, anonymity that felt like freedom, and purpose that disguised itself as destiny. They called themselves Death Eaters, and they believed they were building a new world. What they were truly building was his stage. They marked themselves with his sign, a serpent and skull branded into skin. It was both leash and promise. He called, and they came. He punished, and they trembled. He rewarded, and they sang his praises. He was more than leader. He was myth in flesh. His voice turned fear into loyalty. His gaze turned ambition into servitude. Around him swirled circles of power, like planets around a sun, forgetting that suns burn what drifts too close. The ministry tried to ignore him at first, then tried to contain him, then feared him. Families divided, friends betrayed, whispers grew in every corridor. The name Voldemort slipped from mouth to mouth like poison in water. Some refused to say it, as if silence could weaken it. Others said it only in locked rooms, as though the syllables themselves might summon him. He listened. He liked the silence better than the sound. Fear was the echo he preferred. Hogwarts, far from his reach now, still stood as the one place he could not truly claim. Dumbledore had risen to headmaster, and his presence was shield enough. Students whispered of Voldemort, but in the great hall, beneath enchanted ceiling, courage found food and friendship enough to steady itself. The castle had its own old magic, older even than Tom's hunger, and it held firm. Yet, Voldemort was not finished. He would never be finished. He sought immortality with hands that refused to close, tearing his soul into more fragments, binding them to relics until his name was spread across the world in secret anchors. Diary, ring, locket, cup, diadem, snake, each a vessel, each a refusal to end. He was less man than echo now, an echo determined to last longer than the voice that first made it. And so the boy who had feared ordinariness became the man who feared only one thing: death. He who had mocked weakness built his empire on the most human terror. He who had scorned love built his protections on objects instead of hearts. He who had once been Tom Riddle, born of thistle and manor, now sat enthroned in fear, believing he had outwitted time. But even fear grows tired. Even echoes fade. The louder his name became, the more the world whispered back against it. Children whispered courage in candlelight. Families whispered hope at dinner tables. Teachers whispered lessons of kindness that no curse could unteach. Against his great noise, small voices persisted. And it is small voices, often, that carry longest. Breathe now. Let the noise of his ambition drift away. Picture instead the quiet corridors of Hogwarts at night, torches steady, staircases dozing. Imagine Dumbledore's calm gaze across the hall, unafraid. Imagine the locket set down, the cup hidden, the diary waiting for discovery. They are pieces on a board, yes, but tonight the board is folded, the pieces return to their box. All is still. You are safe in your bed. The story has carried you to the rise of the Dark Lord, but it sets you down gently, as if you were a passenger stepping off a ship into calm sand. The candle bows lower. The night outside your window softens. The boy named Tom is far away, tucked in the folds of history, his choices written in ink you need not touch. All that remains here is breath, the warmth of your blankets, and the hush of sleep approaching like dawn. The candle glows again, patient and low, and the story continues. You have followed Tom from Thistle Shack to orphanage, from castle halls to shadowed travels, from boy to man, from man to a name spoken like a shiver. Tonight, the tale moves into the years of open war, when Voldemort's rise was no longer a whisper in alleyways, but a roar that shook the whole wizarding world. Yet even this can be told softly, as if war itself were a storm viewed from behind safe windows, rain pattering gently while you rest indoors. His followers spread like ink across parchment, blotting into every corner. They carried masks and dark marks, spoke in riddles to hide their errands, and lived for his call. The ministry strained, then faltered. Officials feared shadows in their own corridors. Families felt division, like cracks in walls, brother against brother, parent against child. And in this unraveling, Voldemort stood taller, as if the fear itself were his true army. He did not need to appear often. The idea of him traveled faster than his footsteps, reaching towns before he did, filling hearts before his eyes could. The first wizarding war, they called it later. But for those who lived it, it was simply life. Letters unopened, doors barred at night, news that carried more dread than clarity. His enemies grew fewer, for silence and submission seemed safer. Yet, there were those who stood against him, and they became the light that kept the world from falling wholly to shadow. At their head, Albus Dumbledore, unbent, unbowed, his calm a shield stronger than steel. As long as Dumbledore lived, Voldemort could not claim total dominion. Still, Voldemort pressed on. He did not merely want victory, he wanted permanence. He crafted more anchors for his soul, binding pieces of himself into objects hidden so deeply that death itself would be forced to walk in circles, unable to find him. With every division, his humanity thinned. His reflection in the mirror grew stranger, eyes like embers, skin stretched pale, features altered as though the soul's wounds were rewriting his face. He had sought beauty once, the elegance of control, but now he embraced the visage of fear, becoming the nightmare others already imagined him to be. And then came the prophecy, a whisper carried from seer to headmaster, foretelling a child who would hold the power to defeat him. A child born as July turned to August, to parents who had already defied him 3 times. Prophecies are fragile things, half shadow, half truth, but Voldemort heard only certainty. He marked the words as if they were law, and in doing so, sealed his own fate. 2 families stood as candidates, the Longbottoms and the Potters. Both had shown defiance. Both bore children born at summer's end. Voldemort chose one. Whether by instinct or by error, he turned his gaze to the Potters, and his decision became the hinge upon which history would turn. He arrived in Godric's Hollow beneath a night sky patient with stars. The cottage was small, warm, filled with laughter only hours before. James Potter met him first, wand raised, but love is not shield enough against curses meant to kill. He fell quickly, bravely, his defiance still echoing even as his voice stilled. Lily Potter faced him next, her son cradled in her arms. She could have stepped aside, but she did not. She chose love even when love was death. Her refusal became a spell stronger than any wand could cast. The curse struck, but love, woven deep, bent the magic back upon itself. Voldemort's body failed, shattered by his own hand. His spirit, split and tattered, fled. He was neither living nor truly gone, a shadow unmoored, clinging to existence only through the dark anchors he had forged. The world woke to quiet. The Dark Lord had fallen, undone not by duel, but by a mother's sacrifice. The boy lived. The scar upon his forehead shone as sign and story both. Harry Potter, the child of prophecy, became the one name Voldemort feared. For years, the wizarding world healed, or tried to. Peace returned like cautious sunlight, uncertain if the storm was truly over. Some said Voldemort was gone forever. Others whispered that shadows do not die so easily. And in truth, he lingered, a wraith, a whisper, clinging to forests and creatures that would host him. He was less than ghost, less than man, yet still bound to earth by his Horcruxes. He waited, seethed, plotted. His followers scattered, some captured, some hiding, some still faithful in secret. Time passed. Children grew. The boy with the scar entered Hogwarts, unaware of the story's full weight, unaware that the shadow he carried was still alive. But that belongs to the next chapter. For now, imagine the quiet after storm, leaves glistening with rain, cottages lighting their hearths again, laughter tentative but returning. Imagine a world exhaling, unaware that the shadow has only been thinned, not erased. The candle lowers, the story pauses. You are safe, listening only to the soft retelling, knowing that even in darkest tales, love leaves its mark, and love cannot be undone. The night did not end with Godric's Hollow. It scattered him, thinned him, left him less than ghost, less than echo. Yet still he was, a wisp, a shadow, a thought too stubborn to dissolve. Death had reached for him and closed its hand, only to find emptiness slipping between its fingers. That was the price he had paid, long ago, in fragments of his soul hidden in trinkets and relics. His anchors held. His body was gone, but his will remained, bitter and bodiless. Whispering like smoke in the dark, he drifted far from the warm cottages that had witnessed his defeat, far from the boy who had lived. Forests in Albania received him, places where owls muttered to themselves and wolves refused to explain their howls. He clung to snakes, sliding his thought into their simple minds, tasting life through their tongues. He was less than creature, more a parasite, but he endured. Endurance was his triumph. Where others would have fallen into silence, he crouched in shadow, patient, hateful, plotting. Years passed like water dripping from a stalactite. Seasons shifted over the forest, leaves unfurling, withering, falling, snow layering the branches like bandages. He waited. He listened. The world beyond carried on, believing him gone. Wizards celebrated peace. Children laughed freely again. The scarred boy grew into student. Voldemort remained, unmoored but unyielding, watching from cracks in bark, from the eyes of vermin, from the silence between roots. He was not gone, only reduced, and reduction is not erasure. It was a young man who stumbled into his reach, a professor with nervous habits, wandering far for knowledge he did not fully understand. Quirinus Quirrell, eager for secrets, eager for strength, traveled through forests and ruins until his path crossed the Wraith. Voldemort tested him, wrapped his will around him like a serpent curling around prey. Quirrell trembled but did not resist. His hunger outweighed his fear, and so he became the first host, the first borrowed body. Voldemort rode within him, behind his eyes, whispering into his skull, turning the timid scholar into servant. Together they returned to England. Together they plotted for the Philosopher's Stone, the ancient treasure said to grant immortality. For Voldemort, still bodiless, the stone was salvation. For Quirrell, it was glory reflected from another's crown. They crept into Hogwarts under the mask of teaching, weaving lies among lessons, searching for the prize hidden in dungeons and enchantments. Voldemort pressed always forward, demanding, commanding, unwilling to wait. But the castle that had once educated him did not bend so easily. Behind its doors, a boy had grown. Harry Potter, small and unsure, wearing his scar like an unanswered riddle, faced Quirrell in chambers deep beneath the school. The stone was near, but it did not yield. The boy's touch burned with protection Voldemort had never understood. Love, woven into skin, carried from his mother's final act. Quirrell perished beneath that simple power. The Wraith fled once more, shrieking across the night, denied again, yet still alive. Back into exile he slipped, weaker than before, a sigh on the wind, a fragment without anchor save for those hidden Horcruxes. Again he waited, again he whispered. He was rage without vessel, hunger without hand, yet even this could not stop him. A diary lay waiting in the hands of a lonely girl, Ginny Weasley, who poured her heart into its pages. The diary answered, and through it Voldemort returned, not fully, but as memory sharpened into presence. The shade of Tom Riddle, handsome and cold, spoke from ink, feeding on her life. He would have returned through that page, risen in flesh through the trust of a child, but once more the boy with the scar stood against him. The diary was pierced, its memory bled away, and Voldemort screamed unheard from the depths where he clung. Still, he endured. Pieces of his soul bound him, and though one fragment was gone, others remained. He drifted until another servant found him. Peter Pettigrew, once called Wormtail, once friend of James Potter, now fugitive hiding in rat's form. Pettigrew sought him in desperation, stumbled upon him, and gave him loyalty, not born of love, but of fear. Fear was enough. Together they plotted. Pettigrew carried him, fed him, served as hands where he had none. Their steps carried them back to forests, back to ruins, back to cauldrons where old magic still simmered. There, they brewed a body of ash and blood and bone, a shell to hold the shadow until true flesh could be restored. It was pitiful, fragile, but it let him speak. It let him hold a wand. It let him plot with more than whispers. He was not whole, but he was closer, and so he devised the trap. The Triwizard Tournament, once meant as a celebration of unity between schools, became his chessboard. Through subtle manipulations, through charms placed where no student could see, Harry Potter's name was drawn into the Goblet of Fire. Against his will, the boy was bound to the contest, forced into danger after danger. Each task pulled him closer to the snare Voldemort had set. The final task became the key, a port key, disguised as a trophy, carried Harry away from cheering crowds into a graveyard heavy with silence. There, among tilted stones and names long forgotten, the ritual was prepared. Pettigrew, trembling, carried out the steps. Bone of the father, flesh of the servant, blood of the enemy. The cauldron boiled with unnatural fire, and from it rose a figure clothed once more in body. Voldemort stood reborn, taller than memory, skin pale as parchment, eyes burning crimson, nose slit like serpent. He stretched his fingers and marveled at the strength returned to them. He touched his wand and felt it thrum with recognition. He breathed, and the air quailed. No longer wraith, no longer dependent, he had returned to himself, more terrible than before. He summoned his followers with a mark burned into their flesh. One by one they appeared, masked, cloaked, trembling. Some had hidden, some had fled, some had claimed loyalty to peace. Yet at his call they came. He walked among them, naming them, shaming them, promising reward and punishment alike. His circle reformed in that graveyard, a parliament of fear. He declared his return, not as hope but as warning. Then he turned to the boy. He wanted not just victory but spectacle. He wanted to prove to his followers that death itself was nothing before him, that the prophecy had lied, that the scarred child was no savior. He forced Harry into duel, certain of his triumph. But wands remember history, and his and Harry's were twins, brothers in core, unable to strike one another without recoil. Spells clashed and locked, and from the wand of Voldemort spilled echoes of those he had killed. James, Lily, Cedric, others who lingered in his shadow. They stood between him and the boy, giving Harry time, giving him escape. Once more, the Dark Lord tasted failure at the hands of a child. Still, he had returned. That was enough. The wizarding world would know his name again, whispered in fear, spoken behind locked doors. The ministry denied it, clung to denial as if it could preserve peace, but truth is patient. Soon fear would spread, and soon he would rise higher still. Pause here. In this graveyard of memory, see the pale figure reborn, his circle kneeling, the night wind cold upon stone. See the boy clutching his wand, heart hammering, scar burning. See the difference between them, one surrounded by servants but empty of love, the other alone but carried by echoes of sacrifice. Voldemort stood tall, but shadows stretched long behind him, and shadows cannot walk without light to betray them. The graveyard night had ended, but its echo lingered. Voldemort had risen again, and though the ministry denied it, though the newspapers dismissed it, though many clung to peace as a blanket pulled tightly around them, the truth was already moving like a tide. He walked again in flesh. His followers had returned to his side. The world had entered a second storm. Yet storms are not only lightning and roar. They are also slow pressure, clouds gathering at the horizon, the quiet dread before rain begins. Voldemort's second war began not with armies, but with whispers. Whispers in pubs, in alleyways, in kitchens where radios hissed faint warnings. Whispers that the Dark Lord had returned. Whispers that the scarred boy was telling truth, while the ministry turned its face away. Whispers that masks were gathering in the night. He himself was careful. He had learned the danger of moving too quickly. His first fall had come because he had tried to conquer openly. Now he chose patience. His followers infiltrated instead of attacked, bribed instead of battled, deceived instead of declared. At the ministry, a smile here, a nod there, until corridors filled with eyes that looked the other way. At Hogwarts, students carried secrets in hushed tones, unsure who among them might report their words. In homes, families argued, trust thinning until even at supper tables, silence grew thicker than conversation. The Order of the Phoenix rose again, summoned by Dumbledore, who had seen the truth from the first. They gathered in hidden houses, in shadowed rooms, in safe houses stitched together by charms. They were not many, but they were loyal. Some were old warriors, scarred from the first war. Some were young, hardly out of school, but already willing to risk their lives. They carried messages, guided fugitives, whispered resistance. Against Voldemort's tide, they were fragile boats, yet boats that carried hope. Harry Potter, once again in the heart of the tale, found himself older, heavier with knowledge. Each year at Hogwarts revealed another shade of Voldemort's shadow. He saw the diary, the basilisk, the graveyard, and he began to understand that his life was woven tightly with the Dark Lord's. The scar upon his forehead burned with connection. A thread pulled between them whenever Voldemort's anger flared. It was not just mark but tether, reminding him that destiny was a shadow he could never quite escape. Meanwhile, Voldemort pressed deeper into his designs. He sought a prophecy, a globe of glass housed in the Department of Mysteries. Within it were words he had only partly heard, words that had already shaped his choices, words that spoke of a child who could end him. He hungered for it, believing it would give him certainty. He sent his followers into the Ministry's heart, chasing it through aisles of whispering spheres. Yet when Harry and his friends stood against them, the globe shattered, its contents spilled into the air, useless to any hand. Voldemort himself appeared there, face like pale flame, duel igniting against Dumbledore in a clash that rattled the walls. Fire and water, serpent and phoenix, each spell a testament to mastery. For a moment, it seemed the world held its breath as two titans faced one another. But then the Ministry could no longer deny. They saw him, they named him. The Dark Lord had returned, and peace was broken. Once unmasked, Voldemort abandoned subtlety. The war sharpened. Attacks struck villages, kidnappings rattled families, and those who opposed him vanished into silence. Fear deepened its roots. Even Muggles, innocent of wands and prophecies, felt tremors ripple through their lives, bridges collapsing, weather raging, disasters unexplained. He moved in the shadows of both worlds, teaching fear to grow everywhere at once. Hogwarts, too, felt the weight. It had once been sanctuary, a fortress of childhood. Now it became battleground of influence. Dumbledore guided, Harry resisted, professors guarded, but cracks appeared. Students whispered of sides. Some idolized Voldemort's promise of power, others trembled, others chose courage in silence. Yet even within its walls, death touched them. A student fell, a corridor darkened, laughter became scarce. Childhood was no longer safe. Still, Dumbledore sought hope where others saw only shadow. He walked with Harry, speaking not just of battles but of history. He revealed secrets, Voldemort's mother, his father, the gaunt shack, the orphanage, the ring, the locket, the diary, already destroyed. Piece by piece, the truth unfolded. Voldemort's soul had been shattered, split into many vessels. Horcruxes, he called them. As long as they endured, Voldemort could not die. To defeat him, they must be found, each one destroyed, each fragment dissolved. It was not simply war of wands, but war of persistence, of patience, of seeking hidden truths. Voldemort, unaware of how much was now known, pressed forward in confidence. He believed himself eternal, untouchable, shielded by anchors no one suspected. He moved into the Ministry itself, placing his followers in positions of law, twisting rules until justice became injustice, until truth was smothered beneath decrees. The world bent beneath his influence. Families were split by registry, names by blood. Fear became law. And yet, he feared still. Not Dumbledore's wand, not the boy's scar, but the prophecy that remained unresolved. He had heard its words, that neither he nor the child could live while the other survived. It gnawed at him, the idea that destiny had chosen a rival, that his immortality was tethered to another life. He redoubled his efforts, demanding information, demanding loyalty, punishing failure with cruel swiftness. Even his followers trembled not only before him, but behind him, knowing that service was survival, and survival was fragile. The Order resisted as they could. They guarded Harry, shifted him from place to place, carried news like fragile flames through corridors of silence. They fought skirmishes in alleys, battles in hidden chambers, duels at midnight. Loss weighed on them, but so did defiance. Against an enemy vast as tide, defiance is a lantern small, but enough to guide. Dumbledore, meanwhile, grew weaker. A curse from one of Voldemort's relics had entered his hand, spreading through him like ink through parchment. He knew his time was shortening, yet he pressed on, guiding Harry to knowledge he would need. Together they found the locket, though it proved false, a decoy mocking them with a stranger's initials. Together they stood on cliff and cave, pulling from waters a locket guarded by pale, soulless shades. Together they fought back the darkness rising in waves. Dumbledore drank the poison, his body weakening, but still he returned to the castle. Still he stood, though trembling. And then, upon the tower, beneath the stars, the war came to its sharpest turn. Death Eaters entered Hogwarts, shadows within stone walls. Dumbledore, wandless, weakened, stood before Draco Malfoy, who trembled at the edge of choice. And then Severus Snape stepped forward. A vow bound him, a promise tangled with secrets. With words and wand, he struck. The greatest protector of the school fell, his body descending from the tower, his voice silenced. The war deepened its darkness that night. The one figure Voldemort had never dared face directly was gone. The castle wept, portraits wept. Students clung to one another in corridors suddenly too large, too empty. Voldemort did not appear there, but his presence was felt, vast as the night itself. His enemy was dead. His path was open. His confidence rose like storm tide at full moon. Yet stories do not end in single falls. Dumbledore's death was not silence, but seed. His guidance lived on in Harry, in memories shared, in knowledge carried. The war sharpened, but so did resolve. Voldemort had struck down a giant, yet in doing so, he had scattered sparks into countless hearts. Imagine the world then. Skies darkening earlier, papers filled with lies, families whispering in candlelight, the name Voldemort spoken only in fear or defiance. Imagine him seated in hidden chambers, eyes burning crimson, voice cold, plotting next moves, believing himself already victor. And yet imagine, too, small groups huddled in kitchens, hands joined, vowing not to yield. Imagine students in Hogwarts, secretly passing words of rebellion, keeping courage alive. The Second War deepened like a winter storm that refused to end. Voldemort stood taller than he had ever stood before, his followers swarming like shadows, the ministry bent beneath his hand. He had returned from graveyard into throne, and now he moved with certainty, convinced the world was already his. He walked among ruins of families, among laws rewritten in cruelty, among silence that spread in streets where no one dared speak his name. The Dark Lord believed he was eternal now, untouchable, for his soul was split and hidden, and fear itself carried him forward. Yet even as he reigned, others walked against him. 3 young figures, far smaller than his armies, far weaker in spell, stepped into wilderness. Harry, Ron, Hermione, they carried little more than packs, wands, and memories, but within them burned the guidance of Dumbledore, the fragments of knowledge he had left behind. Their task was not simple: to find the pieces of Voldemort's soul, to unmake what he had hidden, to unravel the anchors that bound him to the earth. They vanished from streets and newspapers, living in tents beneath trees, moving by moonlight, shadows within shadows. Voldemort's name ruled openly, yet against him the quiet hunt had begun. The world above them bent beneath his will. The Ministry, once a place of law, became a stage for cruelty. Muggle-born witches and wizards were dragged before courts, accused of stealing their magic. Their wands snapped, their lives undone. Families shrank into hiding, neighbors betrayed neighbors. Fear carried weight heavier than chains. Voldemort's followers filled every office, their cloaks brushing the floors of power as though they had always belonged there. Even the newspapers, once chattering with gossip and sport, now whispered his decrees, printing lies as though they were truths. A smile of victory spread across his pale face, for to him, control was more than conquest of wand, it was conquest of thought. Still, he sought more. Horcruxes had granted him endurance, but endurance was not enough. He longed for symbols, for artifacts that whispered of greater mastery. In old tales he had read of 3 objects: a wand that could not be defeated, a stone that could summon the dead, and a cloak that could hide from death itself. The Deathly Hallows they were called. Most dismissed them as legend, fairy tales told to children, but Voldemort did not dismiss. He believed, and in belief he pursued. Of the 3, he craved the wand. For though he was mighty, he feared still the prophecy, feared still the boy, feared still the possibility of defeat. With the Elder Wand, the legend said, no rival could stand against him. And so he set his followers searching, graves broken, legends tested, all in service of one desire: to hold in his pale hand the wand of destiny. Harry and his friends, meanwhile, pieced together the puzzle of Horcruxes. They whispered in forests, argued in tents, struggled beneath weight of task that seemed too great. The locket they carried around their necks grew heavier by the day, a fragment of Voldemort's soul whispering despair into their ears. Yet even when they quarreled, even when they faltered, still they pressed on. Each day was survival, each night a choice to continue. In their small persistence was defiance greater than any duel, for against the might of Voldemort's dominion they carried the stubborn flame of refusal. Voldemort's shadow grew longer. His voice filled radios now, his decrees carved into every rule. Schools bent to his will, teachers replaced, children taught fear before knowledge. Even Hogwarts, the castle that had once been sanctuary, bent under his influence. The Carrows patrolled its corridors, cruel lessons inflicted, punishments severe. Yet within those very halls, rebellion whispered. Neville Longbottom, once timid boy, now stood taller, guiding younger students, keeping courage alive. Rooms of requirement became havens. Secret corridors carried laughter and defiance. Even in the heart of Voldemort's grip, seeds of resistance bloomed. The Dark Lord did not see them. His gaze was turned always toward greater prizes. He stalked the land in search of the Elder Wand, convinced that with it, destiny itself would bow. He broke into tombs, desecrated graves, his pale hands reaching for what death had once claimed. From the resting place of Albus Dumbledore he stole it, the wand of the Elder, the wand of lore. Believing now he was invincible, he held it aloft, and sparks fell like falling stars. Around him, his followers whispered reverence, certain that now nothing could stop him. But Horcruxes were unraveling. Slowly, quietly, piece by piece, they were undone. The diary long gone, the ring shattered, the locket wrestled from despair, the cup taken from vault, the diadem discovered in castle's hidden heights, the snake marked, the boy himself revealed as vessel. With each fragment destroyed, Voldemort grew weaker, though he did not yet know it. His triumph was already cracking, though to his eyes the surface seemed smooth. He mistook the silence for strength, unaware that beneath it foundations trembled. His name spread, nonetheless, in villages, in manors, in ministry corridors. He was spoken not as Voldemort, but as he who must not be named. Fear itself became his title. He relished it, for to him fear was proof of dominion. Yet even as he gloried, others dared. Harry spoke his name aloud, teaching others that to name a thing is to rob it of its shadow. Courage grew not in crowds but in single voices, one whisper at a time, until whispers met and became chorus, and so the hunt tightened. Voldemort, with elder wand in hand, marched openly now. He believed himself immortal, invincible, chosen by fate itself. He prepared to strike the last sanctuary, the castle that had defied him since boyhood. He gathered his forces, giants and werewolves, Death Eaters cloaked in black, creatures from shadows drawn to his strength. He stood before them like a general before storm, crimson eyes alight with certainty. The final battle approached, though he thought of it not as battle but as coronation. He believed history was already written, the boy already doomed, the world already his. But prophecy is not so simple, and stories are not so easily bound. For even as Voldemort marched, Harry and his friends drew closer to the truth. They understood now the circle of Horcruxes, the way to unmake what he had made. They understood that the Elder Wand, though powerful, was bound by allegiance, and that allegiance could shift. They understood that Voldemort's greatest weakness was not strength but blindness. Blindness to love, to loyalty, to sacrifice, to truths not measured in spells. Imagine the world in those days. Streets dark, posters screaming faces of the wanted, radios silenced, families whispering in fear. Imagine Voldemort striding through ministry corridors, pale figure in black, cloak trailing like shadow itself, every step a declaration. Imagine the boy in the woods, shivering by fire, scar burning, yet refusing to stop. Imagine the tension in air, like bowstring pulled taut, waiting for release. The candle beside you flickers steady. You are not in woods, nor in castles, nor in ministry halls. You are here, safe, listening to story turned soft. The Hallows, the Horcruxes, the hunt, they are threads in a tapestry woven long ago, now retold in whispers. Each name becomes only syllable, each fear only echo, each triumph only breath. Breathe in, breathe out, let it go. Voldemort believed himself eternal. He had sought artifacts and anchors, trophies and terrors. He had built his throne on fear, his soul on fragments, his crown on myth. And yet, even as he stood tallest, even as he carried the Elder Wand, cracks were spreading unseen. For stories are not finished when their heroes believe them to be. They finish when love and loyalty, sacrifice and courage write their final lines. The castle had stood for centuries, its stones shaped by the dreams of four founders, its towers watching over forests and lake. It had weathered storms, sheltered children, echoed with laughter, borne grief. Now it braced for siege. The night thickened, and with it came the gathering of shadows. Outside its walls, in fields and forests, Voldemort's forces assembled, cloaked figures with masks of silver, giants who lumbered with clubs, wolves prowling on 4 legs, and 2 creatures of nightmare, drawn by the call of power. They were many, and they were certain. At their center stood Voldemort, pale as moonlight, crimson eyes gleaming, wand of elder wood in his hand. He had waited for this night, and in his mind, the ending was already written. Inside the castle, light burned still. The great hall, once filled with feasts and song, now filled with voices gathered in defiance. Professors stood tall. Students clustered close. Order of the Phoenix members slipping through doors with hurried steps. The castle itself seemed to stir, portraits whispering, staircases creaking as though readying themselves for the struggle to come. In that vast hall, courage glowed like hidden embers. They were fewer, smaller, less certain, but their hearts were aflame. Harry stood among them, scar burning, destiny heavy upon him. He looked at his friends, at Ron and Hermione, at faces familiar from years of lessons and laughter. Around him, fear quivered, yet it was steadied by something stronger. Here were students who could have fled but had not, teachers who might have hidden but chose to fight, families who risked all to defend the school that had shaped them. Love tied them together, invisible but unbreakable. The siege began not with thunder but with silence. Outside, Voldemort's voice rose, high and cold, carried on magic so that all within could hear. He offered mercy if they surrendered the boy. He promised life if they gave him Harry Potter. His words slithered into every ear, tempting, pressuring, chilling. Inside, silence held. Then, one by one, voices answered no. No surrender, no betrayal, no yielding. The castle stood with its children, and the children stood with one another. Voldemort's smile, unseen, was thin and cruel. He raised his wand, and the assault began. Spells struck the shield around Hogwarts, the protective charms woven by professors and defenders. Light flared across the sky, sparks falling like meteors. Giants struck at walls, stones groaning but holding. Dark creatures pressed at gates, only to be thrown back by spells cast from battlements. It was a storm of light and sound, flashes in the night, the roar of defiance against the hiss of hatred. The castle shuddered, but it did not fall. Within, defenders moved quickly. Some guarded entrances, some carried the wounded, some whispered courage into trembling ears. Even portraits rallied, shouting warnings, carrying messages across the castle. The ghosts drifted through walls, pale sentinels reminding all that they were not alone. House elves, long unseen in battles, lifted knives and pots and joined with surprising ferocity, proving that courage does not belong to wands alone. Every being who loved the castle found a place in its defense. Voldemort watched, patient. He did not rush, for he believed time itself bent to him. Yet his patience was laced with fury, for each moment the boy lived was a thorn in his certainty. He hurled curses at the shields, his elder wand sparking with power. He expected collapse, and yet the castle held. His followers pressed, yet the defenders pressed back. For every shadow cast, a flame answered. For every fear raised, love stood taller. Through corridors, duels flared, spells burst like fireworks, voices cried out, feet pounded across stone. Yet imagine it softened, not chaos but dance, not screams but echoes. For in this retelling, war is not thunder but tide, washing forward and back, sweeping across the castle, leaving behind silence, then rising again. It was a night of ebb and flow, hearts tested, Courage lit, loss endured, and there was loss. Lives flickered like candles blown too soon. Friends fell, teachers fell, brave souls who had stood without hesitation. In the great hall, bodies were laid gently, cloaked, honored in silence. Tears came, grief pressed, but still the defenders stood, for each loss deepened their resolve. They would not yield, not now. The castle itself seemed to mourn with them, stones echoing their grief, yet lending strength still. All the while, Harry searched. He knew the truth now, the secret of Horcruxes. He sought them in hidden places, guided by whispers of memory and trust in Dumbledore's plan. Each step drew him closer to the heart of the mystery, and closer too to acceptance of his role. The truth weighed on him, that he himself carried a fragment of Voldemort's soul, that his life was tied to the Dark Lord's survival. To end Voldemort, he must end himself. And so, as battle raged around him, Harry chose silence. He slipped away from friends, away from the great hall, away from the living flame of resistance. He walked through corridors he had known since childhood, each step a farewell. The common rooms, the classrooms, the portraits, all watched him pass. He walked into the night, through grounds now scarred by fire, and into the forest. There, in the shadows of ancient trees, Voldemort waited. But Harry did not walk in fear. His steps were steady, his heart strangely calm. He carried within him the voices of those he had lost, his parents, Sirius, Lupin, others who had given themselves. In that forest, he was not alone, though he seemed so. He walked into Voldemort's circle, pale faces staring, Death Eaters holding breath. Voldemort raised his wand. Harry closed his eyes. The spell struck. Silence fell. To his followers, Voldemort declared victory. The boy was dead, he said. He had struck him down, and the prophecy was ended. They cheered, though uneasily, for still they feared him more than they believed him. They carried Harry's body back to the castle, placing it before the defenders as proof. Voldemort's voice rose again, demanding surrender. Grief broke hearts within the walls, yet even grief did not bow them. Neville Longbottom stepped forward, trembling yet resolute, defying Voldemort with words and with deed. He drew the sword of Gryffindor from the sorting hat, proof that courage still chose its champions. Around him the defenders stirred, around him courage rose again, and Harry lived. For the spell meant to kill had struck the fragment of Voldemort within him, tearing it away, leaving Harry himself alive. He rose once more, unnoticed at first, then revealed at last in the final clash. The boy who lived had lived again, and now he faced Voldemort openly, wand against wand, will against will. The duel was not storm but balance, not roar but hush. Two figures circle around them, eyes watching, breaths held. Voldemort, elder wand blazing. Harry, wand steady. But the wand's allegiance was not with Voldemort. It had passed, through loyalty and choice, to Harry himself. When spells collided, when power met power, it was not Voldemort's triumph that followed. The curse rebounded, the wand refused him, and the Dark Lord fell, not with explosion, not with thunder, but with unraveling. His body struck the earth, lifeless. His reign ended. Silence spread. Then slowly, like dawn creeping over horizon, realization grew. The war was over. The defenders wept, laughed, embraced. The castle, scarred and broken, still stood. Light filtered through shattered windows, painting stones gold. The Dark Lord was gone. undone by his own blind grasping. Imagine that dawn, the castle breathing again, portraits smiling softly, ghosts bowing their heads, survivors holding hands, sharing tears, sharing relief. The war that had spanned years, that had darkened lives, was ended. The boy had walked into forest, returned, and faced the shadow, and the shadow had fallen. Voldemort's story ended not with glory, not with triumph, but with quiet collapse. He had sought to be eternal, to outwit death, to silence love. In the end, love outlasted him. In the end, loyalty defeated ambition. In the end, the boy he had marked as rival became the reason his reign could not endure. The Dark Lord was gone. His body lay still upon the stone floor, wand fallen from pale fingers, crimson eyes closed forever. Around him, silence spread through the great hall. For a moment, no one moved, as if the castle itself held its breath, uncertain if such an end could truly be real. Then, slowly, voices rose. They did not roar with triumph, not yet. First came whispers. He is gone. It is finished. The war is over. Then the whispers grew into sobs, into laughter, into the mingled sound of grief and relief too large for words. Hogwarts had endured. Its walls bore scars, its towers broken, its floors cracked and bloodied. Yet it still stood, and within it still beat the hearts of those who had fought. Survivors embraced one another, clung to one another, knowing the price had been high. Families reunited in tears. Friends searched desperately for missing faces. The hall that had seen centuries of feasts now held rows of the fallen, cloaked in dignity, honored in silence. Each life remembered, each name await. Victory did not erase sorrow, but it gave sorrow meaning. Their sacrifices had brought dawn. Harry stood at the center, yet he felt small. The scar upon his forehead no longer burned. It was quiet now, only a mark, no longer a tether. He felt emptiness where once Voldemort's presence had pressed. It was over. He had not thought he would live to see this moment, and now that it was here, it felt unreal, like waking from a long dream. Around him, people looked with gratitude, with awe, with love, yet Harry felt only weariness. He wanted no praise, no glory. He wanted rest, wanted silence, wanted to let go of the weight he had carried since childhood. The Elder Wand lay within his reach, its power humming like storm contained, yet he did not crave it. Where Voldemort had seen conquest, Harry saw only danger. He returned it to Dumbledore's tomb, refusing its temptation. Power was not his desire. Peace was. And so the wand, legend of centuries, rested again in stone, and Harry walked away. The days after the battle were filled with both mourning and rebuilding. Families came to claim their dead, their grief mingling with gratitude that the war was finished. The castle became both sanctuary and shrine. Its stones were mended by magic, but some scars remained, left as memory, as lesson, as testimony. In corridors, portraits whispered of courage. Ghosts drifted with softer eyes, watching over students who had become warriors. The grounds filled with quiet footsteps of those laying flowers, lighting candles, remembering. The wizarding world beyond Hogwarts stirred as though waking from deep sleep. For years it had lived in fear, under laws twisted by cruelty, under watchful eyes of Death Eaters who had filled the Ministry's halls. Now those halls emptied. Trials began, where followers of Voldemort were brought forward to answer for deeds done. Some claimed fear, some claimed loyalty, some claimed ignorance. The world struggled to measure justice. to find balance between vengeance and mercy. It was not easy, for scars ran deep, and wounds of war are not quickly healed. But step by step, law was restored, voices freed, truths spoken again. Voldemort's name became history rather than shadow. Where once it had been spoken in fear, now it was spoken in past tense. Children who had known only whispers learned that the Dark Lord was gone. Families who had hidden now opened doors. Shops reopened. Laughter returned to streets. Festivals were planned again. Slowly, cautiously, light returned to places that had known only dread. Yet even in peace, memory lingered. Too many lives had been lost for joy to be simple. The Weasley family mourned Fred, laughter now quieter in their home. Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks lay among the fallen, leaving behind a son who would grow in the care of others. Colin Creevey, too young to have been in battle, had come and not returned. The names filled hearts, filled silence. The cost of victory was remembered in every empty chair. Harry himself found no desire for grand celebrations. He walked the castle quietly, visiting places that had shaped him. The Gryffindor common room, now echoing with silence. The Quidditch pitch, grass scorched by fire. The lake, still reflecting stars, as though nothing had changed. He thought of those he had lost, yet felt them still with him. His parents, Sirius, Lupin, Dumbledore, all had guided him, and though their voices were gone, their love remained. It lived in him, carried forward, shaping every step. Ron and Hermione stood always beside him. Their bond, tested by years of trials, had only deepened. They too bore scars, yet they too carried hope. They spoke of futures, of what might be built anew. Hogwarts would reopen. Students would return. Life would not be the same, but it would continue, and in continuing, it would honor those who had given all. The years that followed saw rebuilding not just of stone but of spirit. The ministry reformed, led by those who had resisted, guided by lessons learned. Kingsley Shacklebolt rose as minister, his calm strength a balm to a shaken people. Under his guidance, justice was tempered with compassion, and the wizarding world began to heal. Laws that had divided bloodlines were abolished. Those once hunted for heritage were welcomed again. It was not perfect, for no society heals perfectly, but it was progress, and progress was enough. Hogwarts too healed. Its towers were mended, its windows restored, its classrooms filled once more with the chatter of students. Yet the memory of the battle was never erased. Plaques were placed, names inscribed, portraits painted to honor the fallen. Each year, students would gather to remember, to ensure that courage was never forgotten, that the price of freedom was never taken for granted. The castle, ancient and enduring, carried its scars with dignity, as reminders and as guides. As for Harry, he chose quiet life. He did not seek power, did not crave fame. He became Auror, working to protect rather than to conquer. He built family, cherished friendship, sought peace in ordinary days. Where Voldemort had feared mortality, Harry embraced it, knowing that love made life worth its brevity. He raised children who knew laughter rather than fear, who grew in a world where Voldemort's name was only story told by candlelight. Voldemort's defeat was not only end of one man but end of an idea, the idea that fear could rule, that blood could divide, that love was weakness. He had lived by those beliefs, and in the end, they had unmade him. His Horcruxes, crafted in defiance of death, became the means of his destruction. His Elder Wand, sought for invincibility, betrayed him. His blindness to love ensured his fall. He became lesson that to cut oneself from love is to cut oneself from life, and that even the darkest shadow cannot stand against simple courage. The wizarding world moved forward, carrying both grief and gratitude. Families rebuilt homes, shops thrived once more, children grew without nightmares of a name. The world was not perfect, but it was free, and freedom, though fragile, was cherished all the more for having been regained. Imagine that world years after, the castle standing proud again, laughter echoing in corridors, the great hall filled once more with feasts, banners gleaming, candles floating overhead, students raising glasses in cheer, unaware of fear that once gripped their parents, portraits smiling, ghosts telling stories, staircases creaking as they always had, life returning, stronger, for having known darkness. And Voldemort, he became memory, his name written in books, spoken in classrooms, taught as warning. He became story told to children, of a man who feared death so much he forgot to live, who sought power so much he forgot love, who fell not to curse but to courage. He became history, and in becoming history, he lost his power forever. The candle beside you glows low, flame steady but soft. The story that began with a boy in orphanage, with a name whispered in fear, with shadows spreading across world, has reached its close. Voldemort has fallen, the world has healed, and only memory remains. Breathe deeply. You are not in battles, not in halls of grief, not in corridors of fear. You are here, safe, warm, listening to story retold as lullaby. The Dark Lord is gone. Love endured. Dawn followed night. The tale is complete. Rest now, for the story is finished. Sleep gently, knowing that courage outlasts fear, and love outlasts darkness.